structure of the brain is hierarchical from low level to higher and higher levels of processing, where more and more data is integrated together. Visual data is integrated together. And then at higher levels, it actually combines with, we bring our memories into the picture and we combine what we know to what we're seeing, and it comes together. That's high-level processing.
Keep watching to learn more.
Book 3 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hi, I'm Dr. Deborah Lynn Katz, and I'm a guest host on New Thinking Aloud, produced by Dr. Jeffrey Mishlove. Today, I'll be interviewing Dr. Dan Graboi. Dan has a PhD in human experimental psychology from UC San Diego. He has a lifelong interest in psi phenomena and consciousness. He currently works at the California Institute for Human Science, where he develops technology to study psychokinesis, telepathy, and even spoon bending. He's also the creator of Telepathy Master, an online testing tool for psi abilities. One of the reasons I invited him for an interview was because I read 2 of his articles that were published recently in the Journal of Scientific Exploration. And one article is called The Naming Problem in the Recognition of Psi-Encoded Visual Information. This is a problem that's recognized by all remote viewers, new and experienced, as they struggle with many issues related to the fact that information oftentimes comes in bits and pieces rather than as a whole that's easy to decipher or name or understand. And he has some very interesting hypotheses for this phenomena. And then also he has an article called Where is Out There, meaning where is the information that intuitives are accessing, whether spontaneously or through intentional psi. So we'll be talking about these topics and more. Let's get started. Dan, I am so thrilled to be here with you today. We have so much to cover. I was just blown away when I read your 2 articles in the Journal of Scientific Exploration. I was really excited about them because you are bringing up topics that remote viewers, psychics, clairvoyants, and mediums have been dealing with for a long time and constantly talk to each other about. But here you are a researcher discussing these very same topics and in a very thoughtful manner, offering your different hypotheses. And so I'm really excited to really dig into the details of those articles. And I would love to hear how you got involved in these topics to begin with.
Ever since I've been a small child, I've actually been interested in the problem of consciousness. I remember as a little kid, I used to tilt my head from side to side, and I used to be amazed and blown away at the fact that even though my head was tilting and I knew my eyes were changing what they were seeing, the image that I was aware of always stayed upright. That was my initial start at this whole question of what's going on here. How's that possible? My eyes are changing their angles and everything, and yet I'm still seeing everything upright. So That puzzled me as a little kid, I remember, and I always wanted to know what's the answer? How is that possible? I eventually did figure it out in graduate school after going to graduate school and learning about it. I was always interested in these kinds of topics in consciousness. I read Mental Radio by Upton Sinclair when I was probably in grade school or high school. I was always interested in radio and communications, and I was blown away by the whole idea of radio itself, that somehow these waves go through the air, can communicate over distance. As a little kid, I got into electronics, and I used to build radios and crystal radios and all sorts of things like that to try to understand what was going on. That's how that's been an enduring interest of mine. And then later on in life, I started to have psi experiences of different kinds. I had like precognitive experiences and telepathic experiences.
Yeah, in your article, you talk about an experience that you had with your son where he asked you what you were thinking. Can you tell us about that?
My son knows that I'm interested in parapsychology. And so one day we were in the house here and he just sprung on me without warning. He said, "What am I thinking?" I immediately realized that he could be thinking about absolutely anything. By then, I had experimented with telepathy with friends and people and had experienced quite a few telepathic. I knew that I could do it. I remember I looked down at the carpet and I tried to see what it was that he was thinking. In the article, I made a very dark picture that was hard to see because telepathically, the image that I did see is not very clear. It wasn't clear at all. It had very low resolution. I did see what looked like a whitish circle. I knew that something was coming down from the bottom of the circle. I knew that it was a symbol. It didn't look like any kind of, that was it. There was nothing else. There was no background. I remember that I looked at one part of the symbol and tried to see what was in the middle, and I saw little pieces. And I know that telepathy is not something where, for me, I never can see a clear, crisp image at all. It's always very low resolution, and I'm just seeing features of the image, visual features, pieces of it, basically. And when you try to put the pieces together, they don't fit well together because you look at one piece and okay, you see the piece, and then when you try to move and look at another piece, the piece that you were just looking at disappears from your mind, and now you have another piece, but you forget the piece that came before. You don't remember the spatial alignment of the two pieces, so you can't really even put them together. And so I did the best I could. And then, by the way, it lasts for a few seconds. It doesn't stay forever. I can't hold it in my mind. And once I was able to actually come back to an image, I got mad at myself. I wanted to come back to it very badly. And lo and behold, I did come back to it. But that only happened once in my life. Usually once the image goes away, it's gone.
And the time that it came back once in your life, tell us about that. What was the image, or what was the circumstances of that, if you recall?
I was doing an experiment, I believe it was with my brother who was in Singapore. The other thing about telepathy that I'm sure of is that distance does not matter. Anyway, I saw an image and it was pretty clear for a little short while, and then it started disappearing. And all I remember is I was mad. I got mad. I don't usually get mad, but I was pissed that the image was going away. And probably the emotion that I had was enough to bring it back. It came back, and I was able to look at it some more and get some more information out of it. That's really all I remember of that case. But I wish I knew how to voluntarily keep the image in my mind. What about you? Do you notice that the image disappears, it goes away, and how long can you stay with it?
For myself and for so many remote viewers and clairvoyants I know, and I've been teaching for many years. So what you're describing is so common that it does just come in for a split second. But there are techniques where you can go back, just like you did that one time. You can go back and get more. But every time you go back and get more, it's the same thing. It's just like a snippet, and then another one and another one. It's not usually where you're just in the scene for a long period of time. Although that can happen, but that's extremely rare. So it's somewhere in the middle where you can go back and keep extracting more and more information. But just like you described with your first example, as you're getting that more information, you're still having to piece it together. And in between the piecing, there's a lot of room for error, for putting it together in the wrong way, or then you start making assumptions, and then you start going off into what is frequently called analytic overlay. And yeah, you've very well explain how this works for so many people. And the reason I was impressed with your article, which the title alone captured my attention, The Naming Problem in the Recognition of Psi Encoded Visual Information. That problem, I'm constantly in every class I teach, telling the students, for me, this is the biggest problem. And there are so many problems when, it comes to really trying to access information with our psychic abilities. A lot of times I'm not recognizing the overall picture. I'm getting bits and pieces, but on occasion I do, maybe like 25% of the time it is more, there's a scene that I'm going through and I'm in a forest or I'm in a garden, or of course there could be some error in that. But I've said at times, if I only ever just got the bits and pieces and not the whole picture, that might be easier, because then when I do get whole pictures, I could just disregard them as being incorrect. But I don't want to disregard it, because it is cool when you get more of the whole picture, or you can actually name the target. And that's definitely possible. And I had a student just this week who he said he actually did have a whole scene going, and it was a field of windmills, and he drew the windmills. And he said, but he disregarded it as incorrect because he never gets that. Part of what we're trying to do is get more reliable with the information, because then we can make use of it better. You have come up with the different theories around why this happens. So if we can go into those, but before we do that, I think it would be useful to define some of the terms that you're using, both because we have newer people to these topics, but also a lot of times when researchers like ourselves are talking, where we don't always know, we might use the same word, but we might mean different things. And there are different definitions of clairvoyance. So can you give us some of those definitions?
For me, the word clairvoyance means clear seeing, clear vision. But I think you've expanded that term a little bit to include any kind of sensory information that comes in psychically and that you're remotely perceiving, basically, which is remote viewing. But remote viewing implies a certain structure that I think is absent in just the word clairvoyance. I like the expanded view of it. It's not just a visual sense, it's any sense that you're perceiving. If you're smelling something, or if you're, whatever it is you're perceiving, I'd like that to be the concept. That's how I feel clairvoyance is best described, the best way I think about it. Because I contrast clairvoyance with telepathy. And telepathy, obviously, telepathy involves an agent or a person that's looking at something or sending a message to me. And that's encoded information that's going between the sender and me. Clairvoyance is simply, there is no sender. You're doing it all from your own mind. And whether you're seeing something or hearing something, which people also call clairaudience, whatever it is that you're perceiving, I lump that all into what I call clairvoyance. And I believe you have called it that too.
When I worked with Patrizio Tresoldi in our meta-analysis of remote viewing projects over the last 50 years, it was really his definition of clairvoyance that we went with. And he was trying to delineate between real-time clairvoyance, like when you're in the present describing what's there, as opposed to precognition or precognitive tasks when you're trying to describe what's going to appear in the future. And so he was using it in the general term, and he's the lead author on the paper. But part of the problem is we don't have great words to replace it. Many researchers do use the term clairvoyance to encapsulate all the different psychic abilities. It's useful to be very specific with the different clairs. And this is something in remote viewing, which comes out of the historical context of the government programs using psychic abilities. Dale Graff, who I've worked with for a while in the International Remote Viewing Association, and he's the one who coined the term Stargate and was with the government programs from the start to finish. He explains that in the military programs at Stanford Research Institute, initially they were just studying clairvoyance. Like they were clumping all these different abilities together, and they would use these terms. But then as time went on, the researchers wanted to divorce themselves from any terminology that could seem too woo-woo or unscientific. And also Russell Targ has explained that in remote viewing, it really would have been more appropriate to call it remote sensing. But him as a physicist, he was already using the word remote sensing, which was used, I believe, as an aviation term or some kind of tracking for planes. And he had worked on that himself. So he was afraid that if they went to the term remote sensing, people would be getting confused about it. Ingo Swann, who I know you quote and discuss a lot in your articles, he came up with the term remote viewing. All of these get mixed together because even Ingo did a lot of his approaches through writing, and his controlled remote viewing system or method of teaching people how to do remote viewing involves a lot of tactile or psychometry, which I always find interesting too, like where people are touching and then suddenly they can see. And I think you addressed that in your article as well. So yeah, it's tricky. Some people in the remote viewing community don't want you to just use remote viewing as a term for, okay, I'm going to close my eyes and see what image comes up. Like what you did with your son, they might say that's clairvoyance, but that's not remote viewing because you're not using more of a complex protocol. And so they don't want you to use the term remote viewing for that, but people do. And so I've come to the conclusion that rather than having a debate or controversy about what the terms mean, is we have tons of words in our English language where the same word has very different meanings, multiple meanings. We don't have to argue with them. We just have to clearly state what our definition is and how we're going to be using it. I think that works. And I think you did that really well in your paper. Tell us about what causes this problem that a lot of times when we're using our psychic abilities, we're just getting bits and pieces and we don't get the whole picture, or that we misinterpret the information. But then at other times, we do get a whole picture. So maybe starting off with the whole bits and pieces thing, let's talk about some of your theories around this.
When we're looking at something with our eyes open, we see the whole scene in front of us. Or let's say when we're reading, we're looking at the features in each word, but all the words are still all in front of our eyes. So the whole scene holds together. The features are all there. But when we don't have something in front of our eyes, and we're just getting features at a time perhaps in different locations, we have to use our memory to remember what feature was where. Whereas when we're perceiving, it's in front of us. It's just more persistent. So I think that's a large part of the problem, is that we're just getting features, and their locations, their relative locations even, are not that well specified. And when we attend to one feature, that's where our attention is, and we're forgetting our memory. Our memory is fading for the other features we saw. So basically, we have trouble putting the whole thing together. we're getting bits and pieces. And not only that, with our eyes open, we see a very high definition, high resolution color image in front of us. But telepathically, it's just a much weaker signal, it seems. It's not well defined. So another problem we have is the low resolution of what it is that we're looking at. I was once doing some telepathy again with my brother, and I immediately knew this is a garden scene. And for some reason, by the way, I'm very good at seeing fences. Whenever there's a fence with the straight lines, Ingo Swann even said something. I remember reading that somewhere. Whenever there's a fence, I get the fence very well. Anyway, I knew I was looking at a garden scene. There was a fence in the front, and I saw these big green triangles, isosceles triangles, in the yard. What are they? I thought. But I looked at one big triangle and another one, and then I saw behind the house there was a huge big triangle. What is this big triangle? And this was an informal experiment I was doing with my brother, where he would be looking at an image, and then, by the way, he would flip a coin to see which image he would look at, and then I'd be presented with one. Then I'd say what I could say, and then he would show me a choice of two images, and I'd pick the one that I thought I was looking at. That's called two alternative first choice. So the point is that the minute I saw the two images, I immediately recognized the garden scene. I immediately saw that these big, huge triangles, I thought maybe they're big blades of grass because they had the shape of a blade of grass, but then they were green, but they couldn't be a blade of grass. They were too big. I saw they were fir trees. They had a trunk. They were basically shaped like big triangles, but I didn't see the details. I didn't see the pine cones. All I saw was a green, triangular, poorly defined blur. So that's a problem. You don't see the details. I couldn't for the life of me think, even though I knew I was looking at a garden scene, why didn't I think that I was looking at a tree? It was obviously a tree, but I didn't. Yeah. For some reason, my brain was disconnected the idea that it was a tree never occurred to me.
And there's endless examples around trees. I find that so often there will be trees at a target and I'll know that there's trees, but there's other times I think it's a tree, but it's something else that resembles a tree. But after practicing so much, now I'm on alert that if there's just a single thing where I'm like, oh, is that a tree? I know to step back and say there's a good chance it has tree-like qualities. It may not be a tree. And then that's an indication to go back and try to get more. But if there's like clusters of trees, like I'll tend to even recognize the trees. And newer students are constantly having these struggles with trees. So that's very interesting. Like your example is a unique one that I hadn't heard before. But yeah, that's so perplexing. Like, why couldn't your mind just be like tree? So there's some breakdown in that understanding, although it's like you got that the grass-like thing, you knew it was like nature outside.
Oh yeah.
Those qualities were feeding into the shapes and everything. But can you talk about the relationship between psi processing and then problems in, what would you call it? Like when people have brain damage or they've had strokes or things like that. Can you go into some of the parallels between brain damaged people and people using their psychic functioning?
There's a brain damage called integrative agnosia, where basically you can show someone something and they can get features of it, but they can't tell you exactly what it is. They can't name it. It's a naming issue, just like our telepathic or clairvoyant or remote viewing or whatever we're calling this. By the way, ESP is another term. So what happens is the brain is simply not able to synthesize the features into something that can go into their higher cortex that recognizes what the name is, for example, and how it functions. Because perception, it's a long story. We start at the retina, for example, visual perception, and then the retina, and then above the retina, there's neural processing that recognizes individual features. This is called the low-level visual processing. And then the whole processing structure of the brain is hierarchical from low level to higher and higher levels of processing, where more and more data is integrated together. Visual data is integrated together. And then at higher levels, it actually combines with, we bring our memories into the picture and we combine what we know to what we're seeing, and it comes together. That's high level processing. And the brain does both low level, we come up from the lowest level of the retina up to higher and higher cortical levels, and we also come down from higher level cortical levels back down to the low level visual levels, the low visual levels like features. And so this kind of top down and bottom up processing is going on in our brain. That's perception. That's how perception works. If there's a break somewhere in the neural circuitry, like in visual agnosia, where they found definite problems in the brain, then the circuitry is somehow broken and the naming process fails.
It's interesting because you talked about how those same patients, if they're given an object to hold, they may have no problem naming it. I have to say, I had this experience a while ago where I had a student who was just really struggling with the visual, and I specialize in helping people to access information visually through their clairvoyance. But after a 12-week class, the student still felt very stuck. And I suggested at that point that they touch, in this case, it was about reading people and getting information about people, where we usually have the person say their name and then do some visualizations with symbols. But I said, okay, and I meditated on it for a while, or actually every week I was like, how do I help this one student who's really stuck? And I got, well, have them write the person's name they're trying to describe on a piece of paper and touch the paper. And the moment they did that, they started to get visuals. And later on, when I started to study Ingo Swan's controlled remote viewing techniques, which is writing a target number, and then you could trace the target number, or let your hand make a mark called an ideogram and trace the ideogram using our different sensory modalities, might help to overcome some of this. I believe I've got some evidence that it does, but haven't carried out formal studies in it. This might be something for researchers to try to examine more systematically.
This is getting into the realm of psychometry now, right?
Exactly.
People will put something to their forehead and they get flashes of whatever. And very famous psychometrists like Osowiecki, which I've read a book about him, he was just amazing. A lady asked him to find a brooch that she had lost. And so she let him touch the place that she used to wear the brooch. And the minute he touched it, he said, he figured it all out. It was picked up by a man, and the man went to the bank, and the man did this, and he eventually recovered the brooch. But I mean, that he needed to have some kind of there's something about having contact with some sort of object. And I don't know, is that the same that you're talking about? A little bit different.
No, exactly. It's really expanding on psychometry. It's just we've traditionally heard about people doing psychometry where, they take a ring or a watch and then they could trace it to the owner. Sometimes I worry, though, that is it just if someone gives me a object, say their ring, and says, describe me, here's my ring, am I going to describe them, or am I going to describe the person who gave them the ring? And part of it might just be the intention of what point in time, or there's so much information that can come from that. But I almost think it has something to do with grounding. And what is grounding? We can talk about it, and you could define it for us better than I can. But I find that there's a technique of where you just ground yourself, see a cord of energy from going from the base of your spine into the earth. And then you could ground objects that you're looking for. The grounding seems to make a difference. I've found with students, when I have them do that technique, suddenly they're seen more clearly than they were seen before. So there may be some kind of where with our minds and our intentions, we're actually I don't know if we're influencing physical matter in the same way that if you ground an object electrically, that makes a difference. There's something, this seems to be the last thing that researchers want to talk about, but those who do intuitive work, who talk about energy healing, all of that, they're working with forces that we can't see.
My thinking was, when you were talking about asking someone to ground themselves, isn't that also potentially a form of meditation? Actually, what they're really doing is they're quieting their minds. People who do Qigong, they not only ground themselves, they also connect to the sky as well. So there would be that aspect to try.
Exactly. And I work with these a lot, and I am convinced it's not just a meditation effect. And I'll give you an example of something that happened years ago. I was training in this healing center called the Asclepian Healing Center in Marin, California. The founder, John Fulton, passed away, but he would have a group of mediums sitting together in a line, and John Fulton said he needed help. They didn't have enough people there, and he wanted me to be a control for the mediumship line. Now, I was a brand new student, and I had barely ever been there before, and I was like, why is he choosing me? I don't know how to do this. But he told me to stand behind the mediums and just supervise them as they were doing their work. But one of the things that I had learned was how, when you're nervous, imagine that you're creating a grounding cord from your first chakra into the earth and just ground yourself. And so I'm standing behind them and I keep grounding myself. And then the mediums are starting to get agitated. And at one point, one blurts out, would you, like, they turn around and look at me and yell at me, like, would you stop grounding us? We're not supposed to be grounded. We're supposed to be up there. And I was like, I'm not grounding you. I'm grounding me. I wasn't grounding you. So I finally figured out I had to stand there, imagine I was breaking my grounding and try to focus myself above my body. And then when I did that, they were able to start doing what they were trying to do. So I've had a lot of experiences like that where I get verification from the other person. There's other examples too, which have convinced me that these visualizations are not just nice visualizations that relax us, but something's happening. And so I am finding that sometimes with students, they do tend to, actually, the guy said where he said that it was the first time he got like a full picture of the windmills, the technique that he tried for the first time was grounding himself and then grounding the object and then drawing a line in between. It is hard to say though, is it just it's trying a new technique, it's getting more focused, or is there something physically happening? And because we don't have these things to measure what's happening in the scientific arena, it's a little hard to say, is this exactly what's happening? I feel like I can say it outside of the scientific arena, but I had an awareness several years ago now. I was on campus and at a university. I was sitting on a bench and I just started thinking about these topics. And it occurred to me as I was sitting there, I was like, okay, I know right now I'm sitting on a bench. I have context. I'm on campus. I know I'm on a bench. And when I sit on this bench, I know that in that moment I'm sitting, I know where I am. I know I'm on this bench. I could tell the difference between the present and my memories. Like it's hard to do. Sure. But when we're doing remote viewing or a psychic task, we have these memories, but we don't know, is it the target or is it the memory? I see my grandfather. I see the 3 other times I sat on a bench. I'm reminded of like when I went to the store to buy something like a bench. But yeah, you can't tell the difference. And that's part of the problem. Now you're bringing in all that stuff and you may have all this extraneous data in your session. And yes, some of it is spot on and some of it's this extra stuff. And it's very hard to tell the difference.
Our memory is associative. That's how our memory works. It's obvious. Everything associates to everything else. And the information that's out there that people are tuning into, that leads to the question, how is that information out there? How is it stored? And I came to the conclusion that because psychometrists, for example, they want to find somebody or do something, so first they tune into one thing, and then they jump to another thing, and they're always associated. It's an associational jump that I've seen described. My suggestion might be, okay, learn how to turn off your mind. Learn how, it must be, the answer is meditation. If you can learn how to stop all these associations, because your mind just wants to keep on feeding you with, it's the drunken monkey. It just keeps on wanting to go on and on. But in meditation, I assume, I've been meditating off and on for many years, and my mind is still tends to be maybe less of a drunken monkey than it used to be. There are moments now where I can really understand that my mind is quiet. And I think if you're saying, how can I separate my inner associations from the psychic associations that are out there? If you could turn your mind off and just be receptive to what's out there, which may take meditation of some kind, that might be the answer.
What I have found to be helpful actually is the methodology of controlled remote viewing, which again, Ingo and Hal Puthoff developed at SRI. And because it gives you structure on your paper to separate out these different impressions. And so there's like a place where you could just put all your small descriptors like your colors and textures and shapes, and then you could be sketching. Sketching can help you out of the associations. But then there's also a place where you could put all your notes like, I'm reminded of my grandfather. Although if you're reminded of your grandfather, because sometimes in the middle of it, you'll have the understanding like, oh yeah, I'm reminded of this, but I don't know what aspect of this is relevant, but I'm going to just put this down. And separating out on your paper can help with that. It doesn't totally help, but then later you can do more of an assessment of what part of this might have been relevant. Because again, it's like the issue is you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Right.
Data. We all think in metaphors to some extent, but some people really do. Like the moment they see something, they go into metaphors. And those tend to be the people that have the hardest time with separating out all this other stuff from just the raw data, pretty much. Like there may be people that just how they process information naturally is just more so going after raw data to begin with in their everyday perception. Your second article was about where does information come from?
I've come to believe, because of all the evidence that I've seen and read about, especially with high-functioning psychics, it looks like every thought that everybody had is out there, is recorded. That's what the evidence seems to show. Osowiecki could be given like an envelope, and he touches the envelope, and all of a sudden he sees a person from another country on the second floor of a house that has a nice garden, and he thought that he might want to draw a circle, but no, then he changed his mind and he draws a triangle. He knows it's as if everyone's thoughts are out there somehow, and they can be picked up. So that's one of my conclusions. You're asking me what I've concluded. Yes, I think everything is out there. The mystics talk about the Akashic record, and I'm there intellectually. I think, yes, somehow, I don't know how, because it would be an incredible amount of information that has to be stored. And then the question is, okay, are people's thoughts stored? There's a regulation of their heartbeat and things like that the medulla is regulating. Does it go down to what level of definition does it actually go down to that's out there? I've come to the conclusion that there's a non-physical dimension of reality that Western science is simply not acknowledging. And the currency in that non-physical dimension, information is a very important piece of the puzzle. And of course, information that's stored. So it's like a memory. So it's like What is out there? It's like a non-physical memory, but it's more than just a memory because it looks like it's active. I even cited a case where a person was walking somewhere that they wanted to walk and time themselves, and all of a sudden, in amazement, they stuck their arm out and hitched and looked like they were hitching a ride to a car that was passing by.
No.
The fellow watched in amazement as he defeated his own purpose by his arm going out and sticking out his hand in a hitchhiker pose, and the car stopped, and he felt he had to get in even though he was trying to do something else. He gets in, and the lady in the car, they say hi and this and that, and it turns out that his grandmother had wanted to get together with this lady that she had lost contact with in World War II, and this lady had also wanted to get in contact with his grandmother, and basically she asked him, "Oh, do you go to this school?" And he said, "Yes." And she said, "Did you know this person, somebody Casement?" And he said, that was my father. And blah, blah, blah. He basically ended up taking this lady right to the house of this other lady that they were trying to get together, and they had a good day together. So I'm thinking, okay, the information out there is also organized associationally, like it is in our brain. When you're sitting on the bench and all these associations come, and if they're mixed in with psychic associations, how do you separate them? And they died soon afterwards. So I'm saying what's out there is more than just memory. There's an active thing that's out there as well that arranges synchronistic things to happen.
Do you have any other conclusions or suggestions, maybe for where researchers could go moving forward? Do you have any hopes for those who read your articles and hopes for what they might do to build on your work?
One of my biggest hopes is that sooner or later, Western science has to acknowledge parapsychology and the findings of parapsychology. We can't go forward until we acknowledge that there is something else. There is, I believe, a non-physical dimension that, where information is a very important currency of that dimension. We have to Western science has to acknowledge that. And I think parapsychology is the most exciting field there is, frankly, because it's the forefront. It's going to happen. I'm sure it's going to happen eventually. For example, I went to a spoon bending party of all things in Mexico at a convention. And lo and behold, and by the way, as I say, I come from very standard science, and I did not believe in PK. I just didn't believe in it. But then I saw spoons being bent, and I saw another fellow who showed a video of someone who could hold their hands near a pinwheel and make the pinwheel start turning around. And so I thought, okay, I'm there. How can I disregard the evidence? So something that I'm doing now is, because I'm into electronics, I've built a little data acquisition system that can fit into the bowl of a spoon, and it can measure the resistance, the electrical resistance of the handle of the spoon. And I'm going to try to put it in the hands of people who can bend spoons and see if it can measure a resistance change, and when it does or whatever. I'm looking for an effect. We've got to show effects. We've got to show scientific effects. And so that's my hope, is that that'll happen.
Wow, I'm so excited to hear that you're developing this tool for measurement, because I've been part of so many spoon bending parties, and I have been very skeptical myself, especially that people are holding the spoon and they're having, or fork or heavy metal rod, and they're holding it and influencing it, because you always think maybe they were just using more pressure or something like that. But when I've done it just a few times myself, something really weird happened. It was like it seemed to just get soft, and it was so pliable. And it seemed to happen when you take your attention away from it.
Right. Why is that? Why? Tell me about that.
Yeah.
Why is it that you have to take what is it about? People talk about sealing something. It's like first you have to put the intention or whatever it is, and then you have to let it go. You have to seal it or you have to get away from it. Why would that be?
Move your consciousness, because if you're just like so focused, you're yelling at it to bend or just begging it to bend and it doesn't. And then you just start to talk to I've just given up and I just happen to be talking to someone and that's when it does it. Or one time I was at this conference and I hadn't been successful and I thought I'll take this fork up to my room and maybe I'll try it before I go to sleep. And in the hallway, I met a group of people and there was this one French guy, this younger, very good looking French guy. And I was like listening to him talk and I'm like, oh, he's so handsome. It was like
Pliable.
there's something pliable. Yeah. And when this happens, there's like a window of maybe 5 seconds where it's pliable and then it stops being pliable again. So to be able to measure what's actually happening then, because some people might still say we can't trust your own inner experiences. If we're going to be scientific, we have to at least measure it. But I don't subscribe really to the idea that you always have to physically measure something, although like you're saying, it's going to help the other sciences and skeptics accept it. But my good friend Rick Berger, who's a long time parapsychologist, he invented the Otto Ganzfeld, and he always says to me, if you have enough anecdotal stories, that starts to add up as scientific evidence. And that's why I was so impressed by your articles, because here you're not coming first and foremost as a remote viewer or psychic, you're coming as a researcher. You're talking about the same things that hundreds or thousands of intuitives are just finding out naturally. And if you have all these people everywhere, whether just intuitives or researchers or the combination, because these days they tend to be both, if you have enough, that is producing a very large body of data. And the same thing with the bending spoons. There's all these people who are saying, yeah, it became pliable, but only for 5 seconds. They had these independent experiences and it's happening enough where it's like, there's something we really have to pay attention to. And here you are like actually the one developing measuring devices.
I read Brooks' theories basically about spoon bending, and he's conducted hundreds of spoon bending parties and seen this happen thousands of times. Spoon bending is the most widespread form of PK in the world, it seems to me. It seems that when the spoon gets pliable, I'm just about positive that I'm going to see a resistance change somehow, and it's changing the resistance. And enough people have, by the way, I was not successful at that party. My spoon did not bend, but I saw enough evidence of the spoon being pliable. One spoon was just mangled beyond belief. And you say it was pliable. You felt the pliability.
Yeah, it's twisting. It feels like it. It feels like clay. Yeah, it's a totally
chewing gum.
different feeling. Yeah, chewing, exactly. And it's totally different than if you just take an instrument and try to just snap it or bend it. It's a totally different feeling. And it just happens for a little bit. When you have that develop, get in touch, because at the International Remote Viewing Association conferences, we're always doing spoon bending. Yeah, IRVA has an upcoming conference in Cloudcroft, New Mexico, and that's going to be in October, the first week in October 2025. And then we have annual conferences every year. But yeah, I'll invite you. It would be great to have you be a speaker as well. So we'll get in touch on their president. So
okay, because I'm pretty close to being able to make a bunch of these spoons. By the way, the problem is they cost a little bit of money.
About how much do they cost?
I would say maybe $50 a piece would do it. Is that a lot?
That's a lot, but I think there would be plenty of people where if it's really going to measure something, even if people that tend to be successful at it were the ones that, say, you might have a large group, but say 20 of the people who have success, it would be worth it. Either they might want to pay individually, or we could look at something. Okay. How close are you to having this developed?
I have prototypes that are working right now that do the job, but I really want to develop them a little bit further and make them more adjustable so that they can be put on metal strips, for example. They don't have to go on a spoon. They can go, because the question is, it turns out that different types of metal have different receptivities to this kind of energy. And by the way, there's also a field effect that Hauck mentioned, where he put some metal strips into a paper bag and put the bag in the middle of the circle where he had people doing the spoon bending party in a circle. And he put the same type of metal strips in a bag and put them in a safe in his house, okay? And so after the spoon bending party, the strips had started to bend up. They started to bend in the paper bag at the party that were just sitting there. He calls that a field effect. And I would like to be able to measure that field effect as well, by the way. And of course, the ones in his safe at the house didn't bend at all. And he had them in several parties, and after each party, they bent more and more, after 3 parties.
Wow, that is so fascinating. And that's in alignment with, I don't know if you're familiar with William Bankston, who was the former president of the SSE. And he did a lot of research, years of research with mice and cancer. And he found something similar, like where they had a control group of mice in a storage room, and then they had the mice that were the experimental group, and they had university students who were projecting healing at the experimental group, but they found that the mice in the control group started to also have same healing effects as well. So yeah, that brings us to a whole other topic of healing. Psychokinesis, are these one and the same or different? But that's very interesting. We'll have to have you back to talk more about your research in psychokinesis, and we can do that once you've had a chance to test those objects. I know that the viewers on New Thinking Aloud who are going to be watching our interview here, there's going to be a lot of interest in this for sure. Thank you so much for joining me here today. This has been a really fascinating discussion, and I do hope that our viewers will tune in or get copies of your article through the Society of Scientific Exploration in the journal. And it's great that the journal is accessible to everyone. It doesn't cost.
That's why I chose that journal, because it's open access. I hate these journals where you have to pay $40 to even see an article. It doesn't make any sense.
And kudos to the editors of the journal for being open to articles like your own. I know they are very open to these at the moment, and this is really how we're going to move these topics forward. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Book 3 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.